Bigfoot, Dogman, Jersey Devil, and others. Are they real misidentifications or the most cleverly disregarded reality of all time? Come into the cabin and sit down and let's try to find out together. Hey, Lance, how you doing?
Doing good, Robbie. How are you today?
Doing good. Welcome back to the cabin.
Well, man, I appreciate you having me here. Listen, the storms are kind of ominous coming in. Did you run into those coming up the hill?
I did.
Man, I'm telling you, some
dark and ominous.
It sure was.
Kind of setting the stage for what we're talking about tonight.
Absolutely. So, last time we were together, we kind of got to talking about some good subject matter, and you and I both discussed some of our, favorite movies from childhood.
Yeah, what was that you were talking about? What was your favorite movie?
The Howling. I think that was the first horror movie my parents let me watch.
Good movie.
Yeah, it was, and I'm kind of dating myself here, but I was a kid when it was already kind of a classic movie, but still just a phenomenal movie.
Yeah, very, very good effects. We talked about that with Rob Bottin taking over from the duties. It's just one of those things that it stands the test of time.
There were special effects, CGI, computer generated stuff. We're kind of coming on the cusp of the movie industry then, but most all of the effects that they used in that movie were it was real life special effects. This wasn't something generated in a back room. This was something that they planned and did in real time, in real life. And man, besides one of the top comments on some of the YouTube videos you can click and find The Howling, he says that he could have been in Canada by the time he transformed into a werewolf. But man, I think some of that
probably would have been in Canada by the time he finished.
I think some of that kind of stuff is what actually made it such a good movie, because you could really stop and slow down and see the transformation happening.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Well, and along that same line, Rob Bottin took over, but Rick Baker was the one that started first, and Rick Baker was the one, obviously, who did American Werewolf in London. That's probably two of the when you think about
influential werewolf movies,
transformation for scenes that people visceral, just raw, in your face
effects,
yes,
with the
practical effects.
Yeah,
those two movies with those two guys, and they both went on to have phenomenal careers. So, those two guys are really pivotal in movies around cryptids, werewolves in particular, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to delve into tonight. The Hollywood separation of what a werewolf is versus what potentially could be a legitimate biological creature that may or may not be roaming. Some of the information that I dug up showed, for a lack of a better term, dogmen or werewolves sightings on every continent inside of the world except, say, for Antarctica. And I guess you could look at the movie The Thing, and you could call that something. But there's tons of sightings of these dogmen inside the United States.
Right. All over the place.
Yeah.
I think you even said that when there one kind of
at
our back door.
We're a South Carolina based cryptid duo, and we can attribute. I did some searching online, and it was a map that was pinpointing locations and real life sightings that this guy was putting together, and one of them was here in Anderson. Now, I did not find any specific information about that, but it just kind of goes to show you that even in populated areas, because Anderson's a very populated South Carolina city, fairly densely populated, especially in and around the city center, that these things can be just all over the place.
Yeah, I believe Pelzer's in Anderson County. I think isn't that where it was?
Yeah, somewhere in the Pelzer area there. I'm sure these things aren't absolutely pinpointed, but at least we do have one sighting here in upstate South Carolina,
and that's wild to think about. So when we get talking about movies, influential werewolf movies, because like we said, the genre of werewolves, Hollywood type thing versus
to me, in my mind, a werewolf is a little more on the fantastical. This is almost a made up creature because there's so much just craziness surrounding it. Do I absolutely believe that a wolf bites a man and all of a sudden on a full moon he turns and the only way you're going to be able to kill him is pop him with a silver bullet? Maybe not. But man, when you start diving into the world of like Native American lore, First Nations tribes and whatnot, where they talk about dogmen, dog soldiers, it has a little more of a basis in reality for me. Because like, as you and I have discussed before, I'm a little on the skeptical side. I want to believe, but I need to see a little bit of realism in some of these fantasy monsters.
We know you're Fox Mulder.
Yeah, that's me.
But getting into some of the First Nation type stuff that you talked about, like it's not just a werewolf, dogman, skinwalker. That there's different levels of it because they actually had the Lakota had Hatamantaneo. I hope I pronounced that right, which was basically what their dog soldier was, which was a human that could turn or that fought. That dogmen supposedly could not turn between human and
dogmen are dogmen. Period. You're talking about an actual creature, right? So a dog soldier, from the way you're explaining it, is someone that could use that as a spiritual or a supernatural power to influence them in battle or defense or whatever.
That's some people might look at that and think that's a little bit crazy, but think about back in the days of the Vikings. We get the word berserker from the Vikings, which was basically berserker.
Right.
These warriors who went nuts in battle, covered themselves with bear pelts. They actually had another clan that I can't remember what they called themselves, but they followed more of a wolf-like mentality. But these guys would just go crazy in battle, and they would get...
Yeah, you're talking about having to fight somebody that is so... For lack of a better term, they were just doped up on some kind of craziness, whether it's spiritual or chemical.
Right.
And it's they have essentially embodied the power that was the bear to them. You're looking back then. You're looking at somebody that could visualize a force of nature like a bear, like an animal that is represented so much larger than what a human being is, and going up to battle against somebody like that would just be so intimidating to an opponent.
Well, the definition of berserk is furiously violent or out of control. I mean, think of all the werewolf movies you've seen. They're pretty furiously violent and out of control most of the time.
Kind of bringing that back, you were talking about a dog soldier that could kind of summon that power but
still keep the mental faculties.
Yeah, quote unquote, change into that creature. After the battle was done and after things settled down, he could kind of revert back to that person that he was.
Right.
Is that where the basis of a werewolf or a shapeshifter or, like you said, a berserker, that's based in the reality that we're discussing here? Is that something where that type of craziness came from?
Yeah, I mean, it's like we've always said, every story that we've talked about, every legend, every cryptid that we've mentioned is based somewhat in reality. And I dare you, like other than Antarctica, like we talked to, I dare you to find me one country that doesn't have some type of cryptid, in their legends and in their folklore.
Yeah, so it may not be based in a biological experience, but a spiritual experience is something that could absolutely be a part of what this legend is. Like you talked about the transformation between just a regular guy and, he knows he's going to have to do something to survive this next battle. So he brings that raw element of nature, be it a bear or a wolf or whatever type of predatory animal he wants to call upon, and, just kind of goes nuts. And, I'm 100% certain I wouldn't want to go up against somebody like that.
Yeah, that's the way these Viking warriors, that's what they brought in. Nobody wanted to go against the berserkers.
Absolutely not. You can't fight crazy. Do your best to defend against it, but you can't fight crazy. So going along the lines of Indian lore, to me, like I said, I can much more believe a little bit of the spiritual side of what these creatures are instead of the fantastical Hollywood tropes that there are. So you talked about movies, The Howling, Werewolf in London. I was a fan of the lycanthrope series. What were we talking about? Underworld. Yeah, right. Yeah. And it was a good movie.
Yeah,
and you
premise.
watch those. Yeah, you watch those for the fantasy value of it, and I loved it because I'm a guy. I like guy movies. I like these things that are explosions and gunplay and swords and. But how much of that stuff is based in reality versus based in fantasy?
Well, in talking about the Underworld series, it kind of took a different route than some of the other movies that we've seen. It went towards the viral standpoint.
Yeah. So it was influenced, as in it was a sickness that, or a not necessarily a sickness. It was something that infected them and kind of took over their bodies.
Right, and in some of the stories, it traces back vampirism and lycanthropy to one man and his two sons. Okay. The sons of Corvinus, and this is all lore of the movie. One bitten by bat, one bitten by wolf, and that's supposedly where the two strains came from.
Yeah,
but it was a sickness, a virus that was transferred to them by these animals. I mean, rabies, something like that. I mean, you think about in the time frame that this would have happened. If somebody had rabies, they're going to look and act a whole lot different than a normal person.
And not having the medical knowledge we know today, back then you could have made up all kind of crazy stuff. You think back to the times where they were persecuting witches just for any type of difference they would show. And there's a little bit of lore that follows the Native American side with witches having influence over people to turn them into these dog soldiers or dog men, where you've got somebody that was cursed or somebody that it was a form of punishment. They were forced to walk the earth the rest of their days in this form. Now, I don't know if that plays into it, but here in upstate South Carolina, the major Indian tribe is going to be the Cherokee. And the Cherokee had the Oolong Darlala, which was bastardized later on by colonial settlers as Long Dog. It was substantially large. You're talking about something that was 5 to 6 foot long, kind of dog shaped. Every reference that I've seen them talk about was the lope that it had was something like a wolverine, where it was, front paws, back paws, front paws, back paws as it moved. So it gave it that dog-like appearance. What basis would you think that would be brought into? Because what I'm thinking is, we discussed on a previous episode, bears being mistaken for something that they weren't. That kind of has that same mountain lions around here. You have a lot of people that deny they exist, but I'm telling you, they exist around this area.
Right. I mean, we don't know when the last dire wolf was ever seen alive.
Yeah.
Could have been something like that. I mean,
but even at the time period, so the red wolf was native to this area, Appalachia. And you're not talking about a very large wolf there. You're talking about something that was 3 to 4 foot long as a fully grown adult. You're not talking about a large wolf until you get into like the gray wolf, which was a lot more westerly than what we are.
Well, and two, you could have had something like a brush wolf,
yeah,
or a coy dog,
yeah,
same thing. But that would have smaller wolf, but a lot larger than a coyote, may have put it in that same size range that
they were describing,
right,
as a 5 to 6 foot long animal creature.
And think about you've been out in the woods. Think about how coyotes run. They have that kind of.
They do have that gait. They have you watch one move through the woods, and it's phenomenal to see one because they kind of float. Mm-hmm. You ever seen one where the back is just kind of it's a fluid motion. Now, like I said, they were describing it as a little more of a lope, like a wolverine. But there again, whatever it is they had to compare it to was what they had to compare it to. Now,
right.
We've just have recently started reintroducing red wolves around here, so. I don't know. It's not much of a stretch to say that there was an actual animal like that. But, I think you were telling me a little bit about a instance of one that ran into it was a family up in Kentucky.
Yes, the Beast of LBL.
Okay, so that kind of follows along that same
Yeah.
lines. You're talking about something that happened in like Kingsport, Tennessee.
Yeah, well, I'm not
Or that
exactly
area?
It'd be in that area. It's
Yeah.
in the that whole area used to be, and DA could probably speak on this a lot better than I can because that's his area, that's his neck of the woods. All that they actually have a Table Rock Lake up there, just like we do.
Yeah.
And Joe Ball Campground, all that stuff. There's a lot of strange stuff that goes on over there, and he and I've talked about that like a lot. And there's actually a whole YouTube series from different people that go out looking for this thing.
Yeah. The references I was seeing was talking about hunters that this is a very rural area. This is places where they actually have a national refuge, a wildlife refuge. There's opportunities to hunt. There's opportunities to hike. A lot of your experienced hunters will not hunt that land between the lakes, which is actually two rivers in Kentucky.
Yeah, it's a peninsula.
Yeah,
they built that man-made lake, and it's that piece that stayed in the middle. Made the peninsula. That's the land between
that's
the
the
lakes.
land between the lakes. I think what I was referencing, though, or what we were talking about earlier, was in the 1980s, there was a family that was attacked in the land between the lakes, and there were no survivors.
No, nobody survived. And there's a couple of different.
Depending on which reference you look at,
depending on which story.
Yeah.
One of them says the little girl was found up like 20 feet up in a tree.
I heard that and said that's what it brought on to me. In my mind, was thinking about like a mountain lion. Now, there's not a ton of evidence that suggests that mountain lions take prey into the tree like leopards in Africa or cheetahs that will sometimes take them up there and store them. But mountain lions will take prey and store them in an area to be eaten later.
But what a mountain lion won't do is take a bicycle and bend it around a tree.
Goodness gracious!
Because there were two guys that were biking. And I want to, maybe from California to New York. I'm not 100% sure what their route was.
Yeah,
but they were keeping in contact with one of the guy's sister.
Yeah.
Told last time that she had any contact with him. All right, we're coming up on LBL. There's a big storm coming up behind us. We're going to try to get to a campsite before we before the storm rolls in.
So you're essentially setting up the scene here for something to happen. This could be the movie.
Yeah, and something did happen. They were never seen again. Remains were found. That's about it. One of the guy's bicycles was found bent around a tree.
Around a tree.
Yes, completely wrapped around the tree.
Yeah, so at that point, you're not talking about any type of animal.
No, that ain't a mountain lion.
No, that's not a mountain lion that's going to pick up something like that inanimate and do something with it just out of frustration.
Right. I don't even think a big bear would do anything like that.
No, and realistically, both of those animals, now, I'm not saying there's a lot of evidence of attacks from bears and mountain lions, especially mountain lions out west. You don't hear about it as much around here because the population density is a lot smaller with those type of animals. But these aren't animals that attack and kill people indiscriminately.
No. And this goes back into our Hollywood versus real life. Take Jaws, for example.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Sharks don't act like that in real life.
No, what that's describing is the classic Melville situation where you've got a Moby Dick that, man's trying to take out his frustrations on nature and nature fights back.
But we can look at that movie, and then we can look at how sharks act in real life. Do sharks attack humans? Do sharks
absolutely.
Eat? Absolutely. But do they swim around and eat 20 human beings?
No, they're not looking for vengeance.
Yeah.
Versus the Dogman, which in most of the time, 90% of your Native American lore, you're looking at an animal that is described as an evil entity. Right. Whether it's a spiritual animal or a biological just creature, you're talking about something that actively, vengefully takes out its frustrations or is, just for lack of a better word, murderous.
Yeah, and that goes back to some of the emails we read the other night on DA's show from these sightings. A lot of the people, not every one of them, but a lot of them that got looks at the thing's face or got a better look at it, described it as feeling pure evil.
Yeah,
there's not an animal, but
you can
evil.
You can
Malevolence.
Yeah, there's a certain level of malevolence there, and that's what the accounts I was reading from, especially like new or novice hunters that were going into Land Between the Lakes, the feelings that they would have in there. And you and I have both been in the woods. I grew up hunting and fishing. You've done your fair share yourself. When you get out there by yourself, nothing else is around. Help is a couple of hours away. When you get those eerie feelings, it really adds that much more substance to it.
Yeah, and you've been in the woods just like I have. When you're sitting there and all of a sudden everything goes quiet. It's happened to me.
Yeah,
I've been there and all of a sudden no squirrels, no birds, no insects, no nothing.
Because a good indicator of something else, there.
Usually there's a big predator in the area.
Absolutely.
Deer don't usually cause that. You're looking at something like a bear, a mountain lion, or something else that has caused that. And every one of these encounters, that's probably in a good 95% of the encounters is people are like, I noticed that everything in all
the woods went quiet.
Everything went quiet. And a lot of people would say it was like even the wind stopped blowing.
Yes, you're not making any noise. Like I said, my opinion is these dogmen that exist. Appalachia, I saw a lot of sightings up in Michigan, Wisconsin area. That's where a big concentration in the United States is. I feel like this probably is a biological creature moving around, but there's a bit of spirituality there too. The lore that the Native American have attached to it really bolsters it up with it being a spiritual animal, something that has a presence attached to it. Like I said, most of them that I read was an evil presence. That's something that you don't want to come in contact with when you're out there by yourself, even if you are, prepared for bear.
Well, and I mean, you look at all the Michigan Dogman, like you just mentioned, Beast of Bray Road, Beast of LBL, all the major sightings that have been consistently over, decades at least. They always follow a little bit of a pattern.
Sure.
There's sightings.
It is an animal. An animal's going to be a creature of habit.
There's sightings, then there's not. Then there's sightings again, then there's not. If this is really an animal, it's really out there, I mean, I'm sure it's following its prey, which its prey, for the most part, is going to be deer, elk, things like that.
Things that are naturally available. But if, a human being happens to walk into where it can opportunistically feed.
Right.
I'm 100% sure it's going to. You bring it. Let's bring it back to reality. People have been stalked in California by mountain lions. And I'm sure that's just as eerie of a feeling, especially knowing that it's right behind you. Keeps sneaking up on you. But like I said, you start adding that spiritualistic factor to it, to where that feeling kind of rushes through you. Man, that just really adds a whole another element of horror to it.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of these movies come from, is, like we said, these aren't just made up and pulled out of
thin air.
Yeah, out of thin air. This is somebody had some kind of encounter or something, and they told somebody, and somebody's like, what, that would make a good story. They wrote the story down, or later on, hey, that would make a good movie. We made a movie out. It's as fantastical as Hollywood is, it's still, and it pains me to say this, it's still kind of sort of grounded in reality.
Yeah.
I mean, they take their liberties with everything. Sure. Obviously, we know that. Like with the example we just used with Jaws. I mean, there's...
Yeah, the in the 1920s, I think it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was it New Jersey?
Yes,
where
Jersey
they had
Shore.
A few different shark attacks. There was one instance where it was coming up a river,
Matawan Creek.
Yeah, and you got this man-eating shark that's taking bites out of people.
Yeah, and there's a couple of people that were actually chewed up in the surf. Then there were 3 or 4 attacks in the creek, Matawan Creek.
Kids swimming in Matawan Creek.
That is the basis from where Jaws came from.
Yeah,
because there was actually a juvenile, I believe it was a juvenile great white that was caught, and when it was cut open, they found some of the human parts.
Yeah, I mean, it was 4 people.
But
4 people were killed and injured.
They never ever said they never said that the Great White was the one responsible for everything.
No, you're never going to be able to take out that individual.
I believe that there was at least 2 sharks that were involved in that. You know, I believe it was the Great White that was probably in the surf, but it had to be a bull shark that was up in Matawan Creek.
Yeah.
There's not too many. I mean, that's
so the bull shark is the one that's really renowned for being able to kind of withstand fresh water a lot more than what a salt, what a great white's going to be.
They've caught bull sharks up the Mississippi River. You know,
they talked
hundreds
about
of miles from.
They talked about them being 1,000 miles up the Amazon before.
Mm-hmm. They call them the Zambezi sharks down in Africa and over there, but it's the same species,
right? So, like you said, all of these Hollywood fantasies are based in some type of reality, and is that not what? So, when the Native Americans were passing their stories on one after another, you know, and I'm sure that there's some that gets added to it, something that gets a little more dramatized as it goes. That's the Hollywood for us is that same passing of the story. We're just continuing it on.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it just like Ghost in the Darkness.
Yeah.
The movie about the 2 lions in Savo.
Yeah.
You know, that was based on reality, but I don't believe they killed as many as the movie said they did.
No. So, are there any Hollywood movies to you that are really trying to follow along with what would be what you would be considered a typical Dogman, a little more based in reality than just the fantasy werewolf versus a vampire or something like that?
To me, one of the best ones of that Dog Soldiers, which, you know, it's kind of, I don't want to call it a low budget movie because it wasn't really low budget. But it was made in I think they filmed it in Scotland.
Okay.
And it's just about a group of soldiers that were out on an exercise and pretty much run into a pack of werewolves.
Yeah.
Or Dogman, however you want to look at it. Because up until the very end, you never see any of the wolves in any kind of human form. They're constantly in wolf form.
Yeah.
Till the very end, you see one that is changing from a human into, never finishes or completes the transformation before it gets killed. But
right.
Well, I take that back. There is one towards the middle that one of the guys that got bit.
Yeah.
So they got to throw that in there. But he was an outsider.
Yeah.
He was another one of the soldiers.
Yeah.
He wasn't part of that pack. So who's to say that pack wasn't a little bit different?
Yeah.
And then when they bit him, he reacted.
It changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of
because everybody's body chemistry is different.
Right. It varies from person to person.
Yeah. And that's no more fantastical than the way Hollywood does stuff.
No,
and
absolutely not.
That's what they do. They sit around a table like me and you are.
Yeah.
Maybe not in a cabin like we are, but they sit around a table. Hey, what do you think about this? Or how about this? How about we have the werewolf have Superman powers and he flies around and he's allergic to silver?
Anything to tell a better story.
Yeah,
Anything to tell a better story. And I mean, there again, you know that a lot of this stuff's going to be based in some type of truth. So, the basis of the first werewolf story inside like an indigenous person thousands of years ago may have been a wolf that was just a little bit larger, a little bit faster, a little bit darker. And by the time that story of the first encounter starts getting passed from person to person, then it just grows and grows and grows.
Well, and I hate to keep beating this over and over again, but I mean, like we said, it's got to come from somewhere.
Yep.
And that movie was probably one of the better movies that tried to keep things grounded in reality. They didn't play them out to be anything other than big, strong animals.
Yeah.
They had some intelligence, but they weren't superhuman. They weren't picking up cars and throwing cars around. They weren't, trying to
just had that extra the extra ingredient there was that raw animal power.
And to me, the thing that when I look at they did everything practical, number one, which is great because when you start CGI and everything, that takes away, because people get so reliant on that nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
So for them to go completely practical with everything, and
It added
keep
that
it
little
way,
bit of realism to it, didn't it?
so it kept it grounded. So
Yeah.
if this is out there, if you listen and look at most all the accounts, that's pretty close and pretty spot on to what a lot of people say.
Sure.
About 7.5 to 8 feet, German Shepherd type head, long, skinny fingers and claws.
It's a very exaggerated version of a wolf. Very exaggerated version of a wolf. And like you said, when you start adding that spirituality to it, where it's effectively evil, does that pronounce some of the features of it? Like you said, the long claws, the long fingers, the long fangs. That's the part that really gets people's hearts beating with it.
Right. And I mean, but put yourself in, you're out in the woods walking around and you see something like that.
Oh, absolutely. I'm turning around and hightailing it.
I mean, even if it is a real animal,
yeah,
and it's, and it's just an animal,
take away the fantasy of it. If it is a real animal,
and it looks
exists,
like that,
yeah, that's not something you're going to want to stick around and fight.
No,
just like the berserker.
Exactly. So, anyway, we talked about the Underworld series,
sure,
and how they use that.
Yeah, that was one dramatized version of it where it was virus.
Yeah. Talked about Dog Soldiers where they grounded a little bit more in reality.
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy-wise, they never really delve into the causes of it in The Howling.
Mm-hmm.
And I just referenced the first one. It got really, really crazy after the first Howling.
Yeah, so when you're talking about sequels to movies, you just kind of play those off.
Yeah, we'll pretend those didn't happen, because there's not too many of them after that are any good, in my opinion. Anyway, I mean, there may be people out there.
That's the great thing about this show. You and I are just talking about our opinions here. We're just hoping that people listen to us enough to.
the book is from The Howling is a lot different, and it's actually, in my opinion, better than the movie.
In the book, usually,
that's the way it is. So it doesn't really delve into the causes.
Yeah.
But one movie that kind of sort of ties things together for me, as far as fantastical and reality, is Stephen King's Silver Bullet.
Okay.
That's probably my favorite werewolf movie of all time. I've watched it, hundreds of times.
Well, that's one I'll have to put on my to-do list. That's not one I've ever picked up.
Yeah, it's really good. It's got Gary Busey in it, Corey Haim in it, Everett McGill. It's a really good movie. Got a pretty good cast, but it talks about how the moon does not completely and totally dictate the cycle.
Okay, so the moon's not much of a controlling factor.
It's like they're always a werewolf, but the closer it gets to the full moon, the less control the person has and the more control the wolf has.
So it's essentially something that the man's having to fight inside.
Right.
Whether it be a curse from a witch doctor or a disease, it's something inside somebody that they're having to fight.
And but it never says how it never says how he became a werewolf. But it does.
But going back, and I don't mean to interrupt you here, but it just kind of got me thinking. Really a real common way to pass it on is through a bite. If it is a disease, is it communicable through bodily fluids? Is that how it's getting in?
Yeah, and there's been movies that have kind of delved into that, bitten or scratched. The TV show Werewolf back in the 80s. I don't know if you remember that one or not.
I do.
It said anyone who's bitten or scratched by a werewolf, if he survives, he becomes a werewolf.
Yeah.
There's others that say it has to be like you have to have the kind of sort of like some of the vampire stuff. You have to have the blood transfer,
right?
And then there's obviously, like you just said, just being bitten,
transferred from
or there's
saliva to bloodstream.
Yep. There's others that talk about you can be born, and those are considered pure blood
Oh,
or pure
okay.
born werewolves.
Yeah.
Movie with Jason Momoa, Wolves. That
Okay.
they kind of delve into that. And the ones that are born, or pure born, they have more of the fantastical superpowers.
Sure.
But the ones who are bitten, are, they use them more or less like they're mutts.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a, like you said, it's not a pureblood.
Yeah.
It's not a purebred or a purebred werewolf here.
And hate to mention it, but because it's a silly movie, but the Twilight series,
Okay.
it was a genetic thing. You were born a werewolf, and that First Nation tribe,
Uh-huh.
but you didn't turn in that series. And the only reason I know all this is because my daughter is a Twilight freak, and she's told me all this.
Sure, Robbie, sure.
No, she's told me all this. But,
So I can't lie. I've seen the series too, and isn't it funny how it turns out at the end? Isn't she the real monster?
yes, she is. She is the monster. Anyway, it's,
Kristen Stewart, not your daughter.
but it's a genetic thing, and they don't turn unless there's a need to, or a need
Right,
for it.
right.
The vampires come back around. They start killing people.
Yep.
The werewolves, who are protectors of the community, protectors of the tribe, dog soldiers.
Dog soldiers.
Here we go, full circle.
Yeah.
That's when they can.
Like I said, regardless how you feel about those movies, there's that, guys sitting around, hey, let's make this really cool werewolf vampire movie, but let's make it appeal to, teenage girls.
Yeah, and like the old Lon Chaney Jr. Is that really a werewolf? That's more like a wolf man.
Sure.
Totally different from everything else.
Yeah.
So, how do you look at it? What's right? What's wrong?
Well, like
What's
I said,
real?
there again,
What's not?
When you're basing things on legends, myths, creatures that may or may not exist, you get to take a little bit of artistic presumption. You get to kind of make it your own
and
mold it to how you see fit.
And
I'm sure that's how those stories of these,
just like the werewolves in Twilight, are not the typical werewolf that you would see in a movie. They're just big wolves.
Yeah.
More like a dire wolf.
Sure.
That would be, in my mind, what an actual dire wolf would look like.
Right.
7 or 8 feet long, 5 or 6 foot high at the shoulders. That's
a
holdover
from a dire wolf that, I guess, would you ever consider how we've talked about, like, Bigfoot could be a holdover from, like, a Gigantopithecus or something like that? Any of these Dogman sightings in the United States, is there any chance in your mind that could be a leftover dire wolf that somehow has?
Yeah, that's my thought and
that's
belief.
That's one of your beliefs is that
that's what this is.
So it could have survived. It could have stayed out of mind, out of sight until you get a few people seeing it here and there. Mm-hmm. Well, apex predators like that, they tend to live alone. They tend to try to stay real secluded. You even look at something on the scale of like deer. When you hunt deer, when you're finding those really big bucks did not get to be really big bucks by being stupid and letting a lot of people see them.
No, any big animal that you hunt. So
yeah.
So, in conclusion to all this, what are your final thoughts?
Well,
on this, Lance?
in retrospect, I really don't. It's hard for me to grasp the aspect of the traditional European bring over from a werewolf, where you've got some maiden that gets bitten and the only way to, solve the problem is with a silver bullet. Hard for me to grasp onto that. I'm a little more open-minded to this idea that there may be some type of spiritually cursed animal that the Native American tribes have passed on generation to generation as far as the lore goes there. I can really see that as a little bit more of a reality in biology. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Well, how about you?
Well, I'm kind of along the same lines as you. That same. Could there be somebody who makes a deal with the devil and turns into something like that? Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah. If you're a Christian like I am and you believe that the devil has powers and he can do stuff like that, then anything like that is possible.
Yeah.
Now, is that something that all these people are seeing? I don't think so. Maybe some of them, but I don't think that. I think what the majority of these sightings are some type of large canid that may possibly be a holdover from a dire wolf.
An abnormally large wolf.
Right.
Yeah. Which is very, very possible.
Yeah. But now, like I said, that's some of these sightings may be, the other thing.
Absolutely. And that's where that element of it being evil comes from to me.
So it's been a pretty good little session in the cabin.
It has been.
tonight.
I've enjoyed talking about this. I'm hoping that storm's cleared up so that it's not as bad going back down the hill.
One of those dark, stormy nights.
Robbie, thank you again for having me, man.
I
Great
appreciate
conversation.
it, this one was fun.
Yep, absolutely, guys.
If you got any stories for us, remember that email address is what's really out there 2022@gmail.com, and we'll see you next week in the cabin.
And guys, don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Google, just about anywhere you can get podcasts.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.